What's up, COD fans? We've got power rankings to talk about as we're looking forward to the CDL London weekend. So let's go ahead and get things started at the very bottom. The Seattle Surge I have down here still. I know there's a lot of debate about whether the Paris Legion should be last, the Seattle Surge should be last. And honestly, it just comes down to the fact that the Paris Legion won a 3-0 this weekend. So it's hard for me to move them down below the Seattle Surge, who we have not seen play since the Minnesota home series. And in that home series, well, they did beat the Minnesota Rocker in Game 5, and they also took the Atlanta FaZe to 5. So maybe there should be some more consideration for Seattle being higher, but I want to see this new roster play before I move them up. This team has the most potential, I think, to rise up the ranks, but going forward into this upcoming weekend, you're still feeling a little bit cautious about what this Seattle team will do. They play up against London first, and they're in the same pool as both Optic Gaming LA and the Florida Mutineers. This is still a team that ranks completely dead last in Search and Destroy, and their hardpoint still dramatically suffering. In my 11th spot, this is where I have the Paris Legion. Again, I haven't moved them at all. I would have because, again, they have not looked good over the last couple of weeks. But the 3-0 versus the LA Guerrillas definitely inspires just a little bit. Even though it was a close series, 252-28, 6-5 in the Search, and then a 163-155. And then their losses this week were a little bit more convincing than you might figure. But the good news is this team is starting to pick it up a little bit in Search. They had 3 Search and Destroy wins in a row as they beat the London Royal Ravens at the Paris Legion home series a week before. So some consideration maybe that Paris Legion aren't the worst team in the game, but they're the 11th team ranked in hardpoint, the 10th ranked team in domination. Definitely slipping more than you'd like to see. And you'll notice a bit of a trend here as we go into our bottom 3 in total, because in our 13th spot, we have the Los Angeles Guerrillas. Again, no move for these guys. I was expecting much more, though, out of this weekend, and I think a lot of people that have been following LAG would tell you the same thing. That said, their Search and Destroy games both went beyond round 10. A round 11 loss to Paris, and then the round 10 win versus the Atlanta FaZe. On top of that, their dominations were not necessarily blowouts. They did lose to 18 by the Atlanta FaZe, but they were able to keep the Paris Legion game close. On top of all of that, yes, they went 0-3 in hardpoint, but every single one of their hardpoint games were a 200+ to 250 game. So they were competitive. The bad news is, if you're LAG, you can't be 3-0'd by the Paris Legion. That's really what it comes down to at the end. Plus the fact that you're sitting number 12 in both hardpoint and domination still rating-wise, with differentials that are quite frankly embarrassing. That's the best way of me putting it. In my 9th spot, moving up, and actually these are 2 points down here for the Minnesota Rocker. I don't know. I don't know what Minnesota does at this point. It's been 2 straight 2-and-out weekends for these guys. They did play London relatively close throughout, with the exception of the Search, which has been absolutely atrocious lately. They've won 1 Search and Destroy in their last, 8 matches now almost, and most of those losses have been complete blowouts. Things are not going well for Minnesota. They are now the 11th team ranked in the Search and Destroy. They are still somehow managed to hold on to a 5th and 6th ranking. They still somehow managed to hold on to a 5th and 6th ranking for the respawns, but still, it just hasn't been good really anywhere. They did win both their DOMs this weekend, which is a bit of an improvement considering that they were kind of dropping goose eggs there in the last handful of outings, but their hardpoint still looks extremely inconsistent, and I just don't know if there's anything really positive to talk about with this Minnesota Rocker team going forward, so they slip into my 9th position. In my 8th spot, this isn't really a boost for the Optic Gaming LA squad because they deserve the boost, but mostly because Minnesota, I think, is just worse than them right now. I am interested to see how this new addition of Draza and Hollow will help out Optic, if at all. They're going to be going into a weekend where they're going to need to play well because they've got Florida up first, which you don't anticipate them standing much of a chance, but you have to find a way to beat either Seattle or London or potentially both of those teams if you want to make a playoff, which I think is possible. I just don't know how plausible that is as you take a look at the statistics for this squad. 9th, 10th, and 8th across all of the modes. The only bit of good news is that their domination has been trending upward, and their hardpoints have been mostly 50-50. So, if you can find a way to win the Dom, keep your hardpoints 50-50, and take your Search, mathematically it says that you've won 3 maps, so you should be winning series. It just comes down to, we have not seen them play a major team up top really in the last handful of weeks. We have to go back to the Florida home series where they played up against the Atlanta FaZe and lost in Game 4. It was the last time they played a top 4, top 5 squad in the CDL. So this is a weekend where you have to do well if you're Optic Gaming LA if you want to see yourself rise in the stock before playoffs. And rounding out my bottom 6, I've got the London Royal Ravens. They take a 1-point hit mostly because I've got a team jumping ahead of them. It wasn't a bad weekend for London by any stretch of the imagination. Game 4 versus both Chicago and New York, but it did take you 5 to get past Minnesota, which in my mind tells me you're not quite able to compete with the top, and you're still having a hard time getting past teams that are below you. Things need to improve for London. Scraps with an M4 looked good, but now we're hearing that 10 milli is going to be coming back for the MP5. So will they still run double M4s, or will it be back to what we know, which is mostly just Wuskin holding onto an AR and everyone else running an SMG? If that's the case, our questions about if this SMG line can keep pace with one another becomes another problematic issue that we need to consider. So I still have them in my 7th spot overall. Going into my top 6, I was very impressed with Toronto Ultra, and a lot of the reason why I bumped them up this high was simply due to the fact that, yes, they played very well in what was the new meta with double M4s coming out, but we also saw them play at a high level when it was still 10 milli MP5s. It doesn't seem to make a difference which of these metas we're going to see. The roster changes seem to be paying off more dividends than anything else could for this Toronto team, who were able to beat the Atlanta FaZe in 5. Unfortunately, fell short of New York Subliners as they had a close hard point. They nearly pull everything back together. The 247-250 loss. They did not really stand up in the search, but they still kept the domination relatively close. So even though it was a 3-0 loss to New York, this team still held them relatively tightly. Beyond that, they're pretty much still pretty solid in every single one of our modes. 8th in hardpoint, 9th in search, 7th in domination. And all of those are improvements from where they were the last week in my rankings. So everything is moving up for Toronto. Are they a top 5 team yet, though? No, not quite yet. And I would still say that as a 6th spot, it is a little bit risky for them to sit there and say that we are a top 6 squad, considering that their home series is the last home series of the regular season, and it's loaded with just about every single major team currently in the rankings. In my 5th position, I've got the New York Subliners. It was tough, man. I wanted to move the New York Subliners higher. But at the end of the day, have we fully seen enough from New York, considering the fact that it is still going to be a meta that we're probably not going to see again, for them to be better than your Chicago's, Dallas's, and Atlanta's? Your argument is, yes, they beat Chicago 3-0. That was a pretty close 3-0 outside of the domination. And beyond that, they still lost in Game 5 to Chicago earlier in the tournament, where their search and destroy was not nearly as good as it was in the playoff day on Sunday. So for me, I need to see one more instance of New York doing well. The good news is they play up against LAG to start things off this weekend, and then they only have Paris and Dallas to worry about. So pending, and what you figure, New York versus Dallas turns up in favor of the New York Subliners, then I would definitely have seen enough for me to boost them up. But for now, they're like at the top echelon. They're almost there for me to be a top 4 squad in my mind, but still some things to work on. They're still the 9th rated domination team and the 7th rated search team, but the more impressive thing is they have gone from what I believe was 7th in my rankings before, all the way to 4th in the hardpoint, in which they looked very, very good on this week and only dropping 2 maps, one to Chicago and one to London. Both were extremely close. Going a little bit further forward, looking at my 4th position, I've got the Atlanta FaZe taking a drop. And it's one of those things that I was talking about it on the diffuse. I just don't know how many more life rafts I can throw to the Atlanta FaZe. They have to come back with results. Losing to Toronto was really the big thing that kind of had me swing them down below Chicago convincingly, considering the fact that they did get kind of smoked by Chicago as well in the opening playoff game. Definitely kind of helps that argument. It still feels weird to drop them all the way from 2nd to 4th, but I think it's at this point pretty merited. We saw that they had some hard point concerns. They didn't necessarily fix them. Then it was search and destroy concerns. They didn't necessarily fix them. So now it's down to Atlanta. Is this new meta going to stay? Is the old meta going to come back? And can you prepare yourself enough for what will be the final weekend of the home series, where they've got a Minnesota, Florida, and Dallas group at the Toronto home series? In my 3rd position, this is where I have the Chicago Huntsmen taking a little bit of a rise. It was a good 2nd place finish for them, even though they did lose 3-0 in the grand finals. And beyond that, their run before that was actually very well put together. 3-1 on London, 3-2 on New York, 3-0 on to Atlanta. All of those things look great. But then you get 3-0'd by New York. So it's hard for me to sit there and say that they're a top 2 team convincingly. But the good news is for Chicago, you still stay a top 3 team in all of the rankings. You're still the best hardpoint team by win differential. and by win percentage. And beyond that, you're still the third best search team and the third best dom team. The good news for Chicago was the fact that the only search map they dropped this weekend was versus New York, and it took 10 rounds for New York to beat them. So all of our concerns about Chicago and their search and destroy, I think, have mostly been alleviated, and pending they get a good matchup versus Dallas in the future, which again could happen at the last weekend of the regular season as they're on opposite sides of the bracket or groups from each other, they very well could match up again, which would be interesting because in my second spot, I've got the Dallas Empire. Again, we've seen that their old meta still has them reigning supreme. It's been a while since we've seen them play. They did lose to Atlanta and Florida, but they were able to keep most of those series relatively close with only a couple of exceptions. If the 10 milli gets re-GA'd or if it gets put away, I think the M4 meta would very much so help Dallas. But if the 10 millimeter still comes back forward and gets un-GA'd currently, I think they'll still be fine. Plus, they've got a nice little tune-up weekend coming up in the London home series as they play up against Paris first, and then have New York and LAG for them to square up against. So it'll be an interesting kind of reveal. And of course, with that, number one, it's going to be the Florida Mutineers still. There's really not much argument. I think the new meta with 3 M4s would favor them. Pharaoh and Awakening could pull up number 2 and number 3. Or if it sticks to mostly 2 ARs and a lot of SMGs, I still think Florida's the best team in the game. It's hard for us to say otherwise, and we'll have to wait a while before we can even have that conversation again, as they're going to be playing in the Toronto home series at the very end, where they play up against the Dallas Empire first. So that'll be very interesting to see those results. That's your power rankings for you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is yours different? Do you think that New York should be higher? Did I boop Atlanta too big? Is Paris actually the worst team in the game? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, make sure you like. And of course, make sure you subscribe right here on Checkmate Gaming if you want to get more Call of Duty content right here at your will. With that said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll catch you for the London home series. And until next time, hope you keep holding it down. So long.